So for the second session of this plenary symposium, I've been tasked to talk about diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of hospital-acquired and ventilator-acquired pneumonia. And because of time constraints and this being a very broad topic, I've chosen to focus on just trying to answer these three questions. First, how are HAP and VAP diagnosed in children? How are these conditions defined and what diagnostic modalities are available? Second, what are the treatment recommendations for this condition, which presumes that we have to identify what are the common pathogens isolated for HAP and VAP? And finally, is there any way to prevent HAP and VAP in children? So let's look at this first question. So in the diagnosis of any disease entity, it's very important for us to understand the criteria against which these definitions are based. And since HAP and VAP are hospital-acquired conditions, we need to be familiar first with the concept of what nosocomial infections are and how they are defined. So when we talk about nosocomial infections, which is the supposed to be outdated term, kasi ang politically correct now or the preferred term is hospital-acquired infection, they are conditions that affect patients in a hospital or other healthcare facility which are not yet present at the time of admission nor were they incubating at the time of the admission. Now, as you know, it's very important to make this distinction because community-acquired pathogens are definitely less virulent, easier to treat, less exotic, so to speak, compared to hospital-acquired pathogens. And exposing or giving a patient broad-spectrum antibiotics that are effective against hospital-acquired pathogens is an unnecessary exposure that might lead to drug resistance. So, in the usual case, when do we say that that infection has not yet been present before admission or not present on admission or not incubating at the time of admission? The cutoff that is usually used is 48 hours. So infections that are occurring more than 48 hours after admission are usually considered hospital-acquired. The term hospital-acquired or nosocomial also applies to infections that are acquired by the patient in the hospital or in the healthcare facility but appear after discharge. So for example, we have a patient whom we are sending home today but reports having fever, without any identifiable other reason tomorrow or on Sunday, then you would still consider those infections to be hospital-acquired and they should be treated accordingly. Finally, occupational infections among staff should also be considered hospital-acquired. Again, for the same reason. Kung nanggaling sa ospital, malamang mas virulent and they have to be treated with more potent antimicrobials. So how are nosocomial or hospital-acquired infections classified? They're usually classified according to the site of involvement, whether or not it's associated with a device, or it's classified according to the types of organisms that are isolated for that particular condition. Now, specifically, when we talk about hospital-acquired pneumonias, again, they are supposed to be or should not be incubating at the time of the hospital admission and should occur 48 hours or more after admission. It's important to make the distinction between HAP and VAP, and HAP specifically is defined as not being associated with mechanical ventilation. Kasi pwede rin nating isipin na ang HAP is the bigger set and VAP is a subset of HAP. No? Pero ang gusto ngayong definitions, para mas klaro, also in terms of review and implementation of guidelines, is that HAP is something that is not associated with mechanical ventilation, and only when you talk about ventilator-associated pneumonias would you classify them as VAP. So ventilator-associated pneumonia then, therefore, is a pneumonia that arises more than 48 to 72 hours after endotracheal intubation. So what are some of the issues that we need to be aware of? Unfortunately, even if the definitions seem to be straightforward, they actually are very variable, particularly when it comes to the pediatric and the neonatal age groups. The materials that I reviewed for this talk had as many definitions as they had journals, no? So medyo talagang there is a need to come up with a consensus in terms of the definition. However, in most of the publications, they will concur with the definitions I shared. 48-hour cutoffs, HAP being distinct from VAP, and VAP being specifically denoting ventilator association. So hindi subset ng VAP ang HAP, hiwalay silang dalawang entities, mutually exclusive. Few studies also have attempted to characterize HAP and VAP in neonates and children, and the analysis of risk factors and outcomes in the literature have focused mainly on adults. So what are some of the distinct qualities in pediatrics that we need to pay attention to when we look at the guidelines, particularly if we're looking at guidelines for adults? So alam naman natin na each pediatric age group will have distinct characteristics which make them susceptible, more susceptible, less susceptible to infections and to other comorbidities. We also know that the underlying comorbidities in children, like congenital malformations, or for example, susceptibilities to infections, are different and are quite distinct from that of adults. So in the literature, they'll talk about patients or older individuals residing in chronic care facilities, influencing the type of microbial flora that they have, and so on and so forth, which is obviously not the case for pediatrics. You have, again, some unique congenital anatomic or acquired cardiopulmonary diseases that are only present in pediatric populations. And another important consideration is the fact that children really are more susceptible to pathogens, including viral microorganisms. Now, we know that viral microorganisms can also be spread within the healthcare setting. And in the case of a patient who's been in the hospital for quite some time and has already been colonized by bacterial pathogens, deterioration in, for example, the respiratory status might be mistakenly attributed to bacterial colonization when in fact it was actually due to a viral pathogen. So that means hindi naman bawal magkaroon ng simpleng ubot-sipon ang batang nasa ospital. Hindi naman kailangan lahat ng deterioration respiratory-wise has to be bacterial. But of course, it's a part of our job to make the distinction between the two. So this is what the CDC has in its National Healthcare Safety component manual, no? So it's like a handbook that talks about the different health or hospital-acquired infections and healthcare-associated infections. And this particular page has or is focused on pneumonias acquired in the hospital setting. So what are the requirements for diagnosis? This part talks about the imaging evidence, and these are the signs, symptoms, and the laboratory evidence. So let's go through them one by one. You need 2 or more serial chest imaging results with at least one of the following. So it's either a new and persistent or a progressive and persistent infiltrate, consolidation, cavitation, or in the case of infants under the age of 1, pneumatoceles are also acceptable. Now, if your patient happens to have was fairly well, didn't have a previous underlying pulmonary or cardiac disease, then only one definitive imaging test result can already be acceptable. So again, if you have a patient with an underlying cardiac or pulmonary abnormality, you have to make multiple images available to establish the diagnosis of a hospital-acquired pneumonia with these features present. How about the signs, symptoms, and the laboratory criteria? The previous page talks about the adult criteria and separate alternate criteria for children depending on the age group. So I'm showing you now the alternate criteria for children under the age of 1, and you will need to demonstrate worsening gas exchange like O2 desaturations or increased oxygen requirements or increased ventilator demands with at least 3 of the following: temperature instability, leukopenia, end left shift, or leukocytosis end left shift, the presence of new onset purulent sputum or a change in the character of the sputum, or increased respiratory secretions or increased suctioning requirements, respiratory distress presenting as apnea, tachypnea, nasal flaring, or grunting, nasal flaring with chest wall retractions or grunting, presence of wheezes, rales, and rhonchi, cough, and bradycardia or tachycardia. So why are they so particular? The problem kasi with the diagnosis of HAP and VAP is that you might actually be seeing evidence in the radiologic examination that can be explained by some other condition, not necessarily an infection. And so these criteria want us to actually link these changes, such as the need for increasing oxygenation or respiratory support, with evidence of features that are characteristic of an infection. In older children between the age of 1 to 12 years old, the requirements are listed as such. Basically the same, except for the description of the respiratory symptoms, because of course, apnea or chest wall retraction may no longer be as evident because the child is, of course, in the older age group. So what are we supposed to do, or what algorithm are we supposed to follow when we want to establish a diagnosis of HAP or VAP? You have the patient entering into this algorithm, presenting either with one X-ray finding if there is no underlying pathology, or at least 2 imaging findings if there are underlying pathologies, and fulfilling those laboratory and signs and symptom criteria, either if this particular pathway if the child is under 1, and this pathway if the child is between 1 to 12. And only after you fulfill this criteria will you again, or will you now say that the patient has hospital-acquired pneumonia, or if the patient is ventilated, then ventilator-acquired pneumonia. Now, IDSA in 2016 came up with a clinical practice guideline looking at the diagnosis and management of hospital-acquired and ventilator-acquired pneumonia. However, unfortunately, the guideline is directed for adults. So the question there is the data in that publication something that we can extrapolate for pediatric use? In the introduction, they talk specifically about this information being utilized or being more useful for the adult population. But in the same publication, there was a commentary by a pediatrician which tries to see which parts of the guideline can be utilized for pediatrics. And what I'd like to do for the rest of this session is to share this particular information with you. So in the IDSA guidelines, the question that was raised, or one of the questions raised, is should patients with suspected VAP be treated on the basis of either invasive sampling with a quantitative culture result, non-invasive sampling with a quantitative culture result, or non-invasive sampling with a semi-quantitative culture result. So sa atin, ano po bang ginagawa natin? Pagka nag-intubate po tayo, kumukuha po tayo ng endotracheal aspirate, pinapadala po natin sa laboratory, we label it as a tracheal aspirate culture, hope something grows out of it, and utilize that information for our decisions in terms of antimicrobial use. So what does that fall under? That is actually non-invasive sampling, and it's not even a semi-quantitative result. No? So it's just a description of the pathogen that grows out of your culture. So we actually aren't able to employ any of these methods here. When they talk about invasive sampling, this refers to bronchoscopy or blind bronchial sampling, which of course we don't really do in pediatrics, granted the difficulty of doing these procedures in very small infants. What I did find interesting, though, is that despite all of the technological advances in these developed countries, where basically all of these techniques are at their disposal, what did they end up recommending? They said you can actually just depend on non-invasive sampling with semi-quantitative cultures. So this is something we can definitely do. So should we be insistent on asking for a tracheal aspirate culture whenever there's an opportunity? The answer is yes. So the residents I work with, they know this is one of my pet peeves. So when I hear that somebody's intubated and they don't have a culture available for me, or they tell me, ay, hindi po nagawa ng culture, I really blow my top, no? Because there's no way you can go back to that point in time to get that information that's very, very essential for patient care. So, what's the evidence for this in pediatrics? Unfortunately, the data that they have that's available to use as a basis for adults is not present in children. These in-depth data do not exist for neonates, infants, and children. What is available are some studies that look at the different sensitivities and specificities of these different techniques in pediatrics. This study looked at about 100 or so patients, and they saw that you actually got better specificities when you had these more invasive tests and when these were done in a quantitative manner. Unfortunately, the endotracheal aspirate qualitative culture only showed a specificity of about 40+% with a sensitivity in the high 90s. In a smaller study of about 30 patients, they had about the same results. You had 90% sensitivity, 40% specificity if you were going to use an endotracheal aspirate qualitative culture. However, I'd like you to take note that this is for the case of patients who already have had an endotracheal tube in place for quite some time, which is a different story. No? So, syempre, alam po natin, pagka yung invasive device nandoon na po sa katawan ng pasyente for quite some time, pwede po siyang nako-colonize. And therefore, hindi nagiging reliable yung pag-sample ng endotracheal aspirate from a device that has stayed in place over several days. So, that is probably why your specificity is very, very low when you're doing these non-invasive samplings, and you get better specificity when you do the more invasive tests. So cultures of endotracheal aspirate samples in these two studies that were performed in children had insufficient specificity, while quantitative cultures and gram stains of blind bowel fluid samples achieved greater specificity than did testing of the endotracheal aspirates. So just to re-emphasize, if you intubate and you get your cultures right at the point of intubation, you get a fairly good result. In this study, tracheal aspirates cultured at the point of intubation in this group of emergency department adult patients offered important additive diagnostic value. But if you did a tracheal aspirate culture from an old tube, what did you see? Infants who developed sepsis had very poor correlation from pathogens isolated from the blood during the episodes of sepsis and those from previous endotracheal tube isolates. So pag luma ang tube, walang silbi, wag na po tayong mag-culture, sayang ang pera, sayang ang panahon. Routine surveillance cultures of endotracheal tube aspirates in ventilated infants are not helpful in predicting the pathogens that are isolated from the blood at the emergence of sepsis. So, this brings us now to the question of, are blood cultures helpful in the diagnosis of HAP and VAP? The underlying evidence to support blood cultures for patients with VAP is quite limited. You only get about 15% of VAP patients who are bacteremic. However, in the case that these patients happen to grow MDR, it might be very vital, or the information is quite vital, and therefore the guidelines, at least for 2016, still remain in favor of blood cultures for all patients with suspected VAP. Again, this is for the adult guidelines. No information or no similar data available for children. Bacteremic HAP, in contrast, is not unusual. So therefore, the recommendation to do a blood culture is even more emphatic. No? There's a greater proportion of bacteremic HAPs than there are bacteremic VAPs. And therefore, if they recommended a culture for a bacteremic VAP, they recommend a culture for a bacteremic HAP even more. Now, it's going to be very helpful for both guidance in antibiotic treatment and also for the escalation if your results do show an antibiotic with a narrower sensitivity or a narrower spectrum of coverage. What about acute phase reactants? This is something that we feel could be quite useful because it will help us make a decision as to whether the patient is suffering from an infectious pathology or if the infectious pathology has already resolved. So in the case of HAP and VAP, the question posed here in the IDSA guidelines again for adults is whether CRP or procalcitonin plus the clinical criteria, or should we just use clinical criteria alone to decide whether antibiotics are needed? And the answer here is clinical criteria alone are sufficient. So this is again for adults. What does the data say for children? In pediatrics, although C-reactive protein and procalcitonin have been investigated and seem to be able to differentiate bacterial from viral illness in neonates and infants and children, unfortunately, there's not enough data in the pediatric population for us to conclude whether this will be useful for HAP and VAP. How about imaging? No? Should we use imaging to be the basis or the anchor for diagnosis? It's known that chest radiographs have been shown to be neither sensitive nor specific in the diagnosis of community-acquired pneumonia. So what more for hospital-acquired or VAP? CT scans might help by providing better resolution. However, it is associated with additional radiation risks which might not be acceptable considering the risk-benefit profile in patients who have HAP or VAP. So that's why, again, if I may remind you, the reason why imaging is not utilized alone in the algorithm and you need to use clinical criteria to support the diagnosis of HAP or VAP is encouraged. How about clinical scoring systems? Can clinical scoring systems be useful in establishing a diagnosis of HAP or VAP? The IDSA guidelines also tackle this question, and they say, or they want to know whether clinical pulmonary infection score, or the CPIS, plus the clinical criteria performs better compared to the clinical criteria alone. And here they say clinical criteria alone is enough to make a diagnosis of HAP or VAP and to be the basis of initiating antimicrobial therapy, again, for adult patients. Now, in adults, they do have such a thing as the clinical pulmonary infection score, and this has been very well described to correlate quite well with severity and prognosis of the infection. However, in children, there are no such validated scoring systems, although there are systems like the pediatric risk of mortality score or the pediatric logistic organ dysfunction score. However, the problem with this is that most of these scoring systems are designed to work at point of admission rather than at the time when the patient may have developed HAP or VAP, so they cannot be applied in the setting of HAP or VAP as a decision-making criterion. So among all of the things that I actually shared with you, what ended up to be the most useful? Hindi rin daw pwede ang acute phase reactants, hindi pwedeng gamitin masyado or definitely hindi clinical scoring systems. Hindi ganun ka-sensitive ang imaging, no? So ang naiwan lang po sa atin ay the clinical eye, no? Actually. So parang ang sinasabi niya, kahit meron ibang modalities na pwedeng gamitin, yung mga clinical criteria pa rin ang nangingibabaw. And so I think this behooves us to be very, very observant when we assess our patients and try to actually think about whether or not there are alternative explanations for what we are observing before concluding that the patient might have HAP or VAP. Hindi naman lahat ng problema ng pasyente ay dahil sa infection all of the time. So what about treatment? What are the treatment recommendations for HAP or VAP in children? So this now depends on identifying what are the common pathogens isolated. In the IDSA guidelines for adults, we recommend, or they recommend, that all hospitals should regularly generate their own antibiograms so that they can tailor fit their treatments, their empiric treatment regimens to the local susceptibilities. So in the guidelines, they say that you should actually, for adults, you should actually look at empiric treatment for gram-negative pathogens, Pseudomonas, as well as Staph aureus. And the same recommendation exists for VAP. Now, in pediatrics, it is said, at least in this review article, that the pathogens that cause VAP in children are presumed to be similar to those cultured from specimens in adults, and they are predominantly gram-negative pathogens like Pseudomonas aeruginosa, with Staph aureus being an important consideration if you are considering or thinking about a gram-positive infection. So again, with relation to therapy, the guidelines also examine whether monotherapy or combination therapy should be used. And in the adult guidelines, they talk about classifying patients as to severity being the basis for the decision to use either monotherapy or combination therapy. If the patient is, I guess, you would say moderate or at least mildly ill, not in septic shock, not at high risk of death, you have your results of antibiotic susceptibility testing, then monotherapy is recommended. If the patient is in septic shock or moribund, then combination therapy is recommended. But in no case should we be using monotherapy with aminoglycosides. No? So that's not useful at all when you are dealing with HAP or VAP. How long should treatment be given? So this is again also a very important consideration because it's always quite tempting to just continue and continue and continue the antibiotics. So actually the recommendation again for adults in patients with HAP, no, so not ventilator acquired or ventilator associated, the recommendation is to give a 7-day course of antimicrobial therapy. This is because if you give your therapy for 7 or even less days, it doesn't really reduce the benefits of antibiotic therapy, but your shorter duration can help the patient by decreasing the antibiotic-related side effects. It decreases costs and it decreases the risk of acquiring antimicrobial resistance. And therefore, the recommendation, given these potential benefits, is to use your empiric antibiotic therapy for HAP, that is non-VAP, for not more than 7 days. How about VAP? VAP in particular, should VAP then require a longer treatment course? They're looking here at a comparison between 7 or the 8 to 15 days of therapy. And again, even in patients with VAP, the shorter course of therapy is recommended. They reduce antibiotic exposure and reduce recurrent pneumonia due to MDR organisms. And the other clinical outcomes, such as mortality, do not seem to be affected by a longer treatment course. Is there evidence to point towards a benefit for de-escalation? So for de-escalation, the evidence seems to show or seems to favor a benefit for de-escalation because de-escalation is known to reduce cost burden, side effects, and it is also very likely that de-escalation will reduce antimicrobial resistance. There is also although there is a small risk that recurrent pneumonia could be increased by the escalation, it is doubtful that this practice actually encourages superinfection or increases the need for antibiotics. And therefore, with the burden of evidence favoring the escalation, this is what the panel recommended. Should we discontinue if we're just based on clinical criteria alone, or should we use our acute phase reactants as a basis? So here, it is a more conservative recommendation, I would say, in that it favors the use of both clinical criteria as well as procalcitonin in the decision to discontinue antimicrobials rather than to just use clinical criteria alone. So some of the things that they took into consideration included the fact that procalcitonin use can decrease your antibiotic exposure, can reduce the cost, despite the fact that it might be more costly, or the fact that falsely low or falsely high levels can be or can influence therapy. With these two pros and cons, or with these pros and cons in mind, the panel decided that the benefits outweighed the costs, burdens, and the uncertainties associated with procalcitonin testing, and thus recommended that it be used. Again, I hope you're noticing that when these guidelines are taken verbatim from IDSA, I did label the slides as IDSA, and they are meant for adults. I'm not mentioning pediatrics in relation to this because there's no evidence for pediatric HAP and VAP for these recommendations, but I felt that they could still be clinically useful in our setting. So let me now go to prevention. Patients who have VAP are a unique group and actually require what we call bundles of interventions to, or rather patients who are ventilated or who are on mechanical ventilation will require a bundle of interventions to prevent VAP. And these are some of the interventions that have been utilized. So, of course, hand hygiene is a must, as with any kind of patient care. Glove and gown use for endotracheal tube manipulation has been recommended. Patients should actually be on a high backrest between 30 to 45 degrees and may benefit from oral care with chlorhexidine or stress ulcer prophylaxis. In individuals for whom cuffed ET tubes are already required and cuff pressure maintenance is necessary, and the use of orogastric tubes, of course, is already standard. There is a recommendation to avoid gastric overdistension and to eliminate non-essential tracheal suctioning. So wag pong masyadong excited mag-suction kung hindi naman po kailangan. So it's very traumatizing and doesn't really contribute to patient care. So alin po dito ang may particular na studies that are relevant to pediatrics? The ones with asterisk, no, chlorhexidine oral care and stress ulcer prophylaxis, I will discuss a little bit more. So, unfortunately, it seems that oral care with chlorhexidine has very mixed results. So, ang disclaimer ko, I remember collaborating with one of our residents on a study on oral care with chlorhexidine in our ventilated patients, and I was really, really very impressed with the results. No? Maganda in favor of utilizing this modality. However, ito namang mga studies in this publication say na parang walang masyadong pakinabang. So, I guess the jury is still out. Naka-asterisk siya. Baka may naghahanap po ng study, gusto niya siguro itong gawin para mapatunayan na once and for all if it's needed or not. No? So in Brazil, in India, and in India and in Brazil, they actually did not have or did not show any benefit in the reduction of VAP in patients who utilized oral chlorhexidine. Gastroesophageal reflux, of course, is something that you expect to see in a mechanically ventilated patients. But in contrast to adults where stress ulcer prophylaxis is recommended, it is said that in pediatrics, you expect alkaline reflux, not acid reflux. So parang wala raw masyadong benefit ang pagbibigay ng stress ulcer prophylaxis. And of course, you expect that VAP rates will be lower if patients use NCPAP rather than endotracheal tubes. No? This is quite evident simply because of the anatomical differences. So, out of that entire list of VAP bundle that the initial publication recommends, si WHO, mas simple ang hinihingi niya. Sabi niya, ang kailangan lang talaga, or maybe this is what can be applied in the low-income setting, is number one, to nurse in the head-up position. So, dapat medyo naka-elevate. Yung 30 to 45 degree elevation is something they retain. For sterile tracheal suctioning, so kasama pa rin yun doon sa initial bundle, sila, sabi nila, wag na tayong magbigay ng antacids and H2 blockers. So again, parang jury out on this particular recommendation. Kay WHO, it doesn't seem to be cost-effective. there's no need to do your routine changes on respirator tubing. So parang kumbaga hanggat yung pasyenteng yun ang gumagamit and obviously wala namang madumi dun sa tubing, pwedeng hindi palitan. And of course, you want to make sure that your tubings, respirators, and humidifiers are appropriately disinfected in between use. So kung alin man dun sa mga bundles ang gusto nating sundan, the secret is actually to combine these multiple interventions because when applied as a multimodal strategy by an interdisciplinary team, you're likely to be successful whether these programs or bundles contain a lot or just a few of the interventions. And they can be applied whether you're from a high-income, low-income, or middle-income country. So to conclude, I hope I've been able to demonstrate the fact that HAP and VAP diagnosis is based on a combination of clinical and laboratory criteria. Medyo simple lang, hindi naman kailangang masyadong komplikado, and it still depends a lot on our clinical assessment, so we have to be very sure of what we're seeing in our patients. The pathogens for pediatric VAP seem to be similar to adult VAP, and we should be treating based on the antimicrobial sensitivities unique to our institutions. And we want also to utilize these bundles to prevent HAP and VAP when they are consistently implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.